Welcome to 189 Media, where we just don't give a shit. Everything you have ever wanted to know about Smog Monster will be covered. You will be a witness to an in-depth and totally serious assessment for one of the most controversial foes of Godzilla. Smog Monster, also known as Hedorah, is an enemy of Godzilla who made his debut in Godzilla vs. Hedorah in 1971, which was released theatrically in the United States in the spring of 1972 as Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster is universally agreed to be one of the strangest Godzilla films ever made. The film was notoriously controversial after its inception, so much so that the director was forbidden from ever making another Godzilla movie. Anyway, Smog Monster's design is obviously inspired by a pillow covered in tar, and I'm sure there is a metaphor behind Smog Monster's design that I'm just not getting. The film had a strong anti-pollution message, with the director being inspired after visiting a polluted beach. The film includes cartoons, LSD trips, hippies, and a flying Godzilla, all of which easily makes it a contender for being the boldest Godzilla film ever to make it to the big screen. Most people who are not fans of Godzilla are not fond of the film. The US dubbed version was featured in the 1978 book The 50 Worst Films of All Time. The reception by Godzilla fans is mixed. Personally, I enjoy it, but wouldn't put it in my top 5. On an interesting note, back in 1985, Roger Ebert cited it as his favorite of the Godzilla films. Another random fact: Smog Monster appears on the album cover of rock legend Frank Zappa's Sleep Dirt. The director of Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, Yoshimitsu Banno, was extremely happy with the way the Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster turned out. He was so satisfied with the finished product that he started writing another Godzilla film before Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster was even released in theaters. The sequel Yoshimitsu Banno was planning to make is known to fans as Godzilla vs. Hedorah, but the film never got an official name, and even the monster, Hedorah, is nameless. Fans simply came up with the name because the Japanese word for a starfish is Hitodi. Anyway, Hedorah is a starfish who mutates into a giant monster after being exposed to pollution. The complicated plot for the sequel Yoshimitsu Banno was writing would ultimately have Hedorah and Godzilla end up fighting. For some reason that plot sounds awfully familiar. Anyway, Banno scrapped the idea and started coming up with a different Godzilla film, a more direct sequel called Godzilla vs. Hedorah 2. The plot of the film is basically Godzilla fighting Smog Monster in Africa. If this film came to fruition, it would have marked the first time Godzilla battled an enemy in Africa. Anyway, while Yoshimitsu Banno joyfully worked on the sequel, Tomoyuki Tanaka, head producer at Toho, and one of the men famous for creating the Godzilla franchise, viewed the final product of Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster and hated it with a vengeance. He accused Banno of ruining Godzilla. Tomoyuki Tanaka immediately stopped Banno from making the sequel to Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. He also strictly forbade Banno from ever making another Godzilla film. And then he demoted Banno to assistant director on another Toho film. Tomoyuki Tanaka, still filled with burning rage, went on to lead an army of men dressed as Godzilla and destroyed Tokyo. Anyway, this would not be the last we see of our unsung hero, Yoshimitsu Banno, in the Godzilla universe. Anyway, when we last left our hero, the director of Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, Yoshimitsu Banno, he was demoted by evil boss Tanaka and barred from ever making another Godzilla film. He was down in the dumps, demoted to just an assistant director, and humiliated out of the Godzilla universe. Probably the most painful thing about all of it was that he actually liked the film and was expecting to work on a sequel. Regardless, our tragic hero was patient and waited for the right opportunity. As the years passed and a number of other Godzilla films were made, Yoshimitsu Banno was planning his next move and probably training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before it was cool. Anyway, Toho announced after the release of 2004's Godzilla, Final Wars, that it would not produce any films featuring the Godzilla character for 10 years. This was the moment Banno was waiting for. In August 2004, Yoshimitsu Banno, our tenacious hero, announced that he had secured the rights from Toho to make a Godzilla IMAX 3D short film at his Advanced Audiovisual Productions company. The film was tentatively titled Godzilla 3D to the Max, and was to be a remake of the Godzilla vs. Hedorah story. Godzilla fans around the world were pumped. Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster had aged very well in the minds of most Godzilla fans, and had become a cult classic. Production on the project moved along slowly. Then in 2007, the license was renegotiated to allow the release of a full-length 3D film. In 2008, Legendary Pictures joined the mix, and then in 2009, Toho and Legendary Pictures slowly worked out a deal which ultimately gave us Godzilla 2014. And Banno redeemed himself by becoming an executive producer on Godzilla 2014. And we here at BNN are proud to report that Banno is still planning to make a sequel to Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. Toho is working on releasing a Godzilla film by 2016. In other words, the next batch of Japanese Godzilla movies will start rolling out in 2016. Next to nothing is known about Godzilla 2016. Banno's Smog Monster was a monster ahead of his time. With current CGI and special effects, something tells me it is only a matter of time until we see the return of Smog Monster to the big screen, and Yoshimitsu Banno will be spearheading the charge. Anyway, Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster gives us the first and only time we see Godzilla fly. Giving Godzilla the power of flight has helped a countless number of Godzilla fans argue and debate with other fans and enthusiasts from other film franchises as to why Godzilla would win in a fight with any other imaginary monster or superhero. Moving on, Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster gives us the first and only time we see a monster pooping, defecating, or taking a dump on Godzilla. Yeah. As you know, Smog Monster's actual name is Hedorah. The monster was named for Hedorah, the Japanese word for sludge, slime, vomit or chemical ooze. In America, as we all know, he is known as Smog Monster. The German title for Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster is Frankenstein's Battle Against the Devil's Monster. Germany is known for making some of the best beer in the world, and because of that, I'm sure your average German moviegoer is usually drunk as hell, which would explain why they would mistake Godzilla for Frankenstein. As to the reason why they call Smog Monster the Devil's Monster, it is because your average German is OCD when it comes to being clean. Germans are fanatical about keeping a clean home. In fact, a German invented the hot water high-pressure washer back in the 1950s. An American claimed to have invented it back in the 1920s. But the legitimacy of his story was brought into question after he also claimed to have named it the high-pressure Jenny. Anyway, the deep and emotionally extreme dislike Germans have for dirt is why they equate Smog Monster with being the devil's monster. Moving on, in Spain, the film is known as Hedorah, the toxic bubble, because, apparently in Spain, bubbles are not round. Moving on, in Italy, the film is known as Godzilla Monster Frenzy. This title calls into question whether or not the Italian translator who came up with this title watched the film, or even looked at the movie poster. Godzilla vs. Hedorah, also known as Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, is a dark yet bizarrely thought-provoking time capsule which gives us a peek at late 60s, early 70s Japanese culture. The film has aged incredibly well, mainly due to the film's multiple layers and complex messwork of cinematic style. Some view it as a psychotic acid trip, others interpret it as a progressive environmental warning, or maybe an art house piece, or even a love story. Whatever the case, the film, which was regarded as one of the worst Godzilla films ever made at the time, is now regarded as one of the best, by some people anyway. And do not think for a second that Toho, the creators of Godzilla, haven't noticed this relatively new love for the film. So, what does the future hold for Smog Monster? The answer is obvious. Smog Monster will likely be the main antagonist for Godzilla in some upcoming movie in the series, which Toho is planning to begin rolling out in 2016. Next to nothing is known about the 2016 Godzilla film. However, I wouldn't bet the farm on Smog Monster being in it, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was. Anyway, this has been 189 Media, and we will be dropping new videos every Thursday. You have been warned.